Thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited about this panel and bringing the conversation between these films together. When I was watching them together with each other, there seemed to be some really striking connections. They're definitely all films that really challenge this or unsettle this idea of anthropos as the storytelling organism. And I think there are these very different forms of storytelling here that are less to do with the exclusionary models of the human as the storyteller and more to do with shared vulnerabilities, shared sicknesses. I don't want to be the first person to immediately bring the COVID virus into our framing, but it seems like this panel is speaking so much to that. It seemed like when I was watching a few of the films together, one of the kind of ideas that kept occurring to me is this idea that the films are all in some ways addressing the idea of lessons that we learn from sickness, from the fact that the condition of the Anthropocene is to suffer from the ills of another species and to also be doctored by another species and to doctor other species. And I think that idea of doctoring is also quite interesting, where it is to care for and to be medicinal, as in the doctor plants from Mark's film or the doctoring of the bees, but it also means to change something, perhaps irreversibly. And I think this will be a really interesting exploration of where these moving image stories fit into this and explore these ideas. I'm going to allow everybody to introduce themselves for a bit, because we have an hour and 40 minutes for discussion, so we have plenty of time for people to speak to their own films. So I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, and hopefully you've had a chance to see the films themselves, which are accessible via the website. But if you haven't, they are still live and you can still watch them. So I'm going to begin by introducing Felix and Miriam, who were the creators of the film Bewildered Companions, which I think is like a very a kind of fantastic piece of work on these social material entanglements with humans and honeybees, and a movement against this kind of complacency mongering language of certain kinds of nature film towards this activist version of film. Triggered by the migration of a small bee parasite from Asia, the culture of beekeeping in Europe today is deeply shaken. The search for new and better practices is also a struggle of different imaginaries regarding the ontological status of the honeybee as domestic or wild. That section at the beginning of the film, which starts with that argument, I think that also fits quite well in Lifting the Green Screen. I think the first line of Lifting the Green Screen is "The ant was our first farmer." So I think there's an interesting connection between those two films as well. Felix and Miriam work as cultural anthropologists and filmmakers at the intersection of academia and art. Felix came to anthropology after several assistantships and camera work in film. He is currently doing research on ecological topics in the field of science and technology studies at the Munich Center for Technology and Society. Miriam came to film from academia and has been teaching in the field of visual anthropology at the Institute of Cultural Anthropology since completing her PhD on documentary film reception. Together, they have been running the Munich-based production company Primate Visions since 2015, where they also put their work focus into film and explore the possibilities of film as a research medium. With Felix as cinematographer and Miriam as sound designer and editor, they co-direct their own and commissioned works. Bewildered Companions is their first feature-length film together. So I'm going to pass over to you, if that's all right, Miriam and Felix, and I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you, Amy, and hi, everyone. We weren't sure if there are people who actually didn't see the film so far. Can you maybe give us a sign, or if everyone saw the film? Didn't. So that's only one. Because we were thinking to just show the short trailer of the film again. We will just put the link for that into the chat room. and that would mean now it's 9 past, that we will meet in 3 minutes. Well, everyone stays here, but turn down your microphones. So that is here. It's a bit more than 2 minutes. So see you in a bit. Okay, so I guess everyone should be back and have a image back of how our film is made, about the different styles we developed in the film. And maybe I just very briefly say how this film came to be done and what our main questions were, or what we were really looking for the way we were composing the film. First, it is a mix out of our both research topics. Miriam did a long research in visual anthropology and in about documentary reception, especially about different forms of knowledge and how they are evoked in different documentary filmic styles and received on the audience side. And I did a research especially on this field that is also depicted in the film, about honeybee health and the crisis that was induced through the arrival of the varroa mite in beekeeping, and also in honeybee research here in Europe and the US. And one thing was very important for us, because it is a highly contested field where different people who are all very engaged for the survival of the honeybee and for keeping them healthy and productive. They have very different approaches and very different ideas about what to do in such a crisis. And I think this is also something we all experience now through the current crisis. That this is a moment where ideas about how to solve it can explode. But there was a very strong first reaction that was technological control via medication. And there were activists coming from the outside, I would say, outside of the main discourse on how to solve such a problem, with very differing ideas. So what we try to do is to bring them all into the film, but not as you usually could play it dramaturgically, that you say we create one hero and we follow him through his journey fighting all the others who got it really wrong, but take the viewers with us into this field where it's actually very hard to decide who is right and if anyone is actually wrong. But that knowledge is a contested process. So that is the starting point, I would say. So what we try to do is really make sure that we deconstruct in a way this traditional way of bringing in experts who explain the world and then serve images which illustrate what the experts what the experts explain to us, but bring the viewers into a position where they really have to decode the images themselves and have to decide for themselves who they want to follow in their view on the problem. And of course, we had to do a lot with different sets of knowledge, and a large part is clearly implicit body knowledge and practical knowledge. And we wanted to give a lot of space for people to follow these people and to experience with them what they do and how what they do and how they do it actually affects their perspective and on the problem, and how these two sets of knowledge are related. And thirdly, we wanted to give a lot of space, or we also wanted to give space to the bees and the other non-human actants involved in that field of practice. So we used a lot of macro lens and also slow motion, and I would say these were our conceptual starting points. And maybe Miriam, do you want to add to the structure? of the film? And
yeah, maybe just a couple of sentences. So that's that's how we choose, I would say, our audiovisual tools, or that we try to really immerse ourselves. So, like, to use the media, the camera, and we used a lot of highly directed microphones also, to immerse ourselves into these fields, and to also use it as tools to get to a certain point where we could understand how the sensory knowledge making processes in these fields work, and therefore be able, or learn to be able to also convey it and to transmit it in the film. And I would say there was one main thing that we tried to achieve, and also to shift or to share the knowledge that is produced more horizontally, or in a flatter way, to bring the viewer in and to give some space to also follow with us, with the bees, with the small parasites that we try to depict, and not only have this view from outside, but also moving along with them through the image and through the sounds. So and as Felix already said, this main approach to have the different protagonists, to bring them really into a dialogue, and to open up a space for all of them to really rethink their ideas on how to solve a crisis. I would say that was the main point for us. And Amy, you already said it in the introduction. The outcome was not a romantic film on honeybees and little villagers producing honey in a very romantic and nice way, but more of a like jumping right into the center space of a crisis where people are really struggling, and there are no good or bad guys in this field. Really, it's just they are
all in this together in a way.
Yeah.
And this is maybe also something to come to an end, but also to give into the discussion that we were thinking a lot about our role as researchers to that field also, and that we felt a lot that this has aspects of activist research, actually, because we got really involved into some of the fields, and I still am finishing the PhD on this topic at the moment. So for us, it was the question if activist research, often as we know it, really tries to emphasize a standpoint of a otherwise marginalized group or position, and we had the feeling that in some cases, as in our field, for example, this wasn't an approach interesting for us, or we had the feeling would be helpful, but rather with our abilities as anthropologists to think ourselves into maybe very opposing worldviews and conceptualizations of a certain topic, that we also have maybe the capability and possibility to bring very different worldviews together on a table in a way, and to provoke people on all sides to think themselves into the others and open themselves up in a calm way to the others. So we were thinking if this is rather a way for activist research at the moment, especially if we come to these in environmental crisis or health crisis, where so many people are involved, and it doesn't really help if we keep polarizing. I don't know. Shall we leave it there?
Yeah.
For now?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that can definitely be seen. That's the idea of the crisis as this initial point for asking. At one point in the film, somebody says, we learnt how to ask the question, how do we treat the bees, from the threat of the mite. That is what taught us to ask this question. And I think that's kind of a fantastic way into this discussion. and will be an interesting point to move on to the next film. I'm not going to ask you direct questions now. I mean, I'm going to kind of bring everyone through first. But I think that idea of the crisis and the threat being the prompts to these cross-species strategies of adaptation and more sensitive cultural techniques is a really interesting way into Blake's film, which also has this kind of open-endedness that comes from threat. And these different forms of knowledge-making spaces. Of course, in Bewildered Companions, we're moving between the laboratory, the hive. I love the fact that in the film there is, in the very beginning, before we hear any human words, it's not even buzzing that we hear first, it's kind of scraping. So it feels like a film which is totally about moving tools back and forth between bees and humans, and these changing scales by which, at one point it will be like, I can't remember the name of the substance that the bees use to sort of create their defensive mechanisms, but somebody will be kind of scraping at that, and then that. Yeah, so it seems a really interesting piece of work in terms of this. There are almost no static shots. Almost at every point, there's some sort of task being performed, and the task is somehow being passed back and forth between the humans and the bees, which seems like really kind of fascinating in terms of these cross-species actions of healing and harm. So hopefully that will be a kind of interesting way into Blake's film next, which is, it's open-ended. It's also to do with these kind of threats of harm. Let me just find the introduction. The blurb for the film. It's a trilogy. It's an ongoing trilogy, and it concerns a Penan family and their adopted son made a movie about a virus that has spread across the globe and their search for the medicinal plant to save humanity. In the post-logged forests of Sarawak, they try and make the senseless in their climate-changed realities. So sense-making the senseless. And Blake, also known as Lakay Kyong, I hope I've pronounced that all right, is Australian according to passport and based between Berlin, Sarawak and Sydney. Working across multiple mediums, the past was dedicated to collaborating with Indigenous communities in language preservation projects. Since 2013, his practice-led research has been with Penan communities in Sarawak, Malaysia, with a focus on material engagement with the post-logged forests. More interested in dialogue than in answers, aspiring to the open-ended, a student to life, and more formally a graduate of MA Visual and Media Anthropology in Berlin and BA Writing and Cultural Studies in Sydney. His practice can be defined as documenting resistance and alternatives to the dominant mode of life under global capital. In 2011, he learned to listen. In 2017, he was named He Is His Mother's Son. I'm going to mute myself now, if that's all right, Blake.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. And thanks all. I think Annalisa and Roger, thanks for the curation. It's so wonderful to actually be in a panel like this and to bring all the films together. And I think even within your introduction, Amy, picking up on some of those parallels that stand out within the films has just been really interesting for me. Like, as we say, a sick planet, medicalizing and doctoring and questions of that with the Anthropocene. So I'm grateful to be here with such a wonderful bunch. Tulin is a collaborative film that I worked with Mutang Tuo. Every project that I work with in Sarawak is with Mutang, who's an incredible activist, been working on the ground for the last 40 years. In brief, I would say the Tulin trilogy was an attempt to explore future making and going into the process of climate futures and predictions. And within that process of looking at a timeline of 50 or 100 years into the future, we sort of watched our worst nightmares come true in front of the screen. Within that fact of things like flooding that was predicted to come into the area of Sarawak, all happening within those 4 years that we were making the film. And then, of course, the key storyline of Tulin, it's a doco fiction, that Blur. But the key sort of storyline is the story of a virus outbreak that takes over the world. And I think, as we're hearing, those sort of parallels of medicalizing a sick planet actually ring really true. And perhaps Corona is merely just that response. I think for me, one of the key things is sort of this vast the comparison of almost the everyday realities, the sensual realities of existence versus the stories we tell. And Tulin was in many ways the question of how story is an imposition, and the attempt at trying to create and find meaning often within just the interconnected nature of life is always within this imposition. And often that's when we start to see the confines of aspects such as linearity or what have you. And so that, that sort of sparks these vast juxtapositions between almost like a sci-fi future of very worded, dialogued, meaning-making processes of engaging with the world in comparison to a much more sense-based existence and, connection between life forms. Probably in brief to add, I think what excites me about this discussion today and what I can feel as some parallels is, and in resonance with what Miriam and Felix were saying about this question of the no good guys, bad guys, and perhaps seeing our practice as almost like a mediator or negotiator between these polar opposites. I think one of the things that we really explored when we were trying to make Tulin was we are activists. We're doing this literally in a response to the deforestation and the continual deforestation of a 130 million year old forest that in the last 30 years, 96% of it has been cut down in Sarawak, Malaysia. One of the big sort of aspects that came out was this uncertainty of where to point the finger of blame. And sometimes it was clear cut in the story of Sarawak to talk about corruption from the political institutions that often monopolized logging and have made personal wealth fortunes. But in making the film, it also takes on a reflexive position of asking what it means to have the camera and asking what role actually filmmaking and the cult of awareness actually plays within these activist attempts of helping a damaged planet. And for me, the film represents almost a near paralysis of grief, trauma, lots of aspects of the environment, and also just making it and experiencing the film. I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is almost like a question of what role it plays within the film. And when you sort of go into all of that sensual materiality and actually asking, the embodied experience, suddenly it becomes very explicit for me as this ultimate question of saying, if I'm always, with a camera in hand, if I'm looking at the camera, then if that's what I'm doing, then my hands actually aren't in the soil. When someone's just watching the screen, they're not outside, they're not actually engaging with it. And I felt Tulin in many ways is this dilemma, this paradox, trying to unravel what this means for us as environmental practitioners, researchers, artists, are we actually just further perpetuating the stages of alienation by inserting cameras and screens to separate people from this beautiful environment that we're all praising and exploring. And yeah, versus those bridges. So I think they're just some of the sort of points to share, but it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Blake. That's really fascinating off the back of what Felix and Miriam were saying as well about the kind of scale of the collaborations of bewildered companions compared to what you're saying. There are these scales of basically daily labor of the ethics of care and having neighbors and neighborliness and creating better conditions of livability, which are these very small scale daily models of maintenance. And then there are these other scales of threat and disaster. Your film and the way that you presented it really made me think about that essay, The Limits of Utopia, the Mayvel essay, which, you know, asked that question, is it worse to hope or to despair? And then answered to that question, there can only be one answer. Yes, it is worse to hope or to despair, because bad hope and bad despair are mutually constitutive. Capitalism gets you coming or going. And I think that's kind of fascinating within the context of this growing film that you're creating, which is aware of itself within this broken system. And what does it mean to be kind of trying to think this through within the limitations of these like extreme futures and extreme hope and extreme despair, which can itself at that scale be something which is disempowering and alienating. I've just lost my window. Okay. I think that this will also be a really interesting point to move on to the next two films in terms of something that Blake was saying in terms of, you know, what does it mean to be looking through this screen, because at the moment that you are doing that, your hands are not in the soil. And the two films that we're now going to move to discussing and will be introduced are also kind of to do with this dilemma of how we remediatize these experiences. So these are both films which are about very intimate physiological, medicinal encounters with plant worlds, which are somewhat undecipherable and very hard to represent then on screen. And they relate to each other quite interestingly. We're going to begin with Tatiana. I'm just going to introduce Tatiana, whose film, The Living Forest, explores the kind of generations of dreaming and forms of knowledge of the forest as an interpretive process. It really reminds me of that Eduardo Kohn book, Thinking Like a Forest, where he uses this quote, the dream is the aperture into the forest. And it definitely seems to explore this idea of the forest as this semiotic science system beyond traditional linear storytelling, and the kind of almost somnolent possibilities of filmmaking, and these local generations and pursuits of ecological well-being. I don't think I have a bio noted down for you, Tatiana, so perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself in whichever way you'd most like. But yeah, so this is Tatiana speaking to her film, The Living Forest.
Hi, everyone. Do you hear me? Hi, it's 3 a.m. here where I am right now. So sorry, I was late. But so happy to be here. Thank you, everyone who's here now too. The film, it's so many things, I think, at the same time. It was one thing at the beginning when I started the film. It was supposed to be something else, but then in the process, everything kind of changed. So basically, I'm going to start with my introduction. So I'm now, I guess, I'm a documentary photographer. And then I started with visual anthropology. So that's my background. I mostly do documentary photography, and this film was the first film that I started kind of like incorporating, this visual anthropology aspect in my work. So I try to kind of create like this, or trying to follow this decolonized way, or like I try to do like a collaborative practice with the work that I was doing. So yeah, that's I guess that's my background for now. I do both now, documentary photography and filmmaking. And about the film, like about Eduardo Kahn, he was one main persons I read before I started the film. So a lot of the things that he says, I try to kind of understand also when I was doing my investigation. And it became this more like also self-exploration of what it meant to be in the land for the time that I was in, and what it meant to dream and to live, and like the everyday life following the dreams, and more like trying to understand what the dreams meant for the people I was working with, to be connected to the land, and to kind of follow also your dreams. It was kind of like this journey of like learning or relearning how to dream again, because it was something that a lot of us forget, and we're just in like a place where we just go to sleep, and then we don't really pay attention what the dreams have to tell us. So relearning this, and trying to connect through the dreams with the land and all these spirits that are alive and surround us, was like another completely experience, I guess. But yeah, I still think like I'm still learning this process now of trying to dream. So the film kind of goes into this two different, or tries to go into these two different worlds, like the material world that we all experience and we all know, and a little bit of my personal journey of interpreting these two worlds, like the material and the spirit world. And then there is the women's role, the Sapara women, and how the Sapara women try to take care of the land in a way that follows their dreams. And it's like this connection of trying to keep the forest alive so they can continue to have dreams, because they explain that if the land gets destroyed, then all these spirits, the living spirits of the forest that inhabit this place, they leave, and then they won't have any dreams because the spirits won't make them dream, and then they won't know how to act on their everyday life, or what to do on their their daily life. So everything is kind of like a cycle, or something that keeps them. It's like the system that keeps them going, but everything goes back to the dreams and to the spirits of the land. So, but then there is this point where you're like, where you also question yourself, and when you don't dream, and you're in that was some questions that I had while I was in my field work, because there were days that I didn't dream. And then we always woke up for dream interpretation at 3 a.m. And then it was, what do you dream? How is your day going to be? And then I would be like, I didn't dream anything. And then I'd be like, I don't know. And then they will be like, well, you did dream. You're just not aware yet of, like what's going on here yet. You haven't connected to the land yet. And then it was, this kind of like, okay, now how do I connect to the land? Like it was my first two weeks there. And, like they will give me all this medicine to take, and they'll be like, yeah, you will start dreaming. And in a little bit, you're still like, your mind, they were like, your body's here. And then your mind is still in the city. You're still thinking about all these other things that you have to do in the city. So your spirit keeps kind of like wandering around, and it's not connecting to your body 100%. So they will say like the medicine, like the plants and the tobacco will help you to reconnect both, because they believe that life is a 50% in material and then a 50% spirit. So they will say that this has to be balanced, and we have to learn how to continue this balance with the material and the spiritual world. And the way that they do it is through the dreams. So during the day, the body is the one that is working, that is doing all these things, that it goes to the forest to collect the fruits, that it goes to the river to fish. And during the night, the body has to rest to prepare for the next day. And your spirit's the one that works. And the spirit's the one that goes into this other this other world, which it's this, like they have this etheric experiences where they get messages, or it could be visions of what the future will hold. And that's how also they will prepare themselves. For example, if the extractive industries want to enter their territory, they will say that we already dreamed that. We already know when things are going to happen here in our land. So if we don't dream, then we won't know, and then they will just happen, and we won't be prepared to fight these things, to resist these things. So I saw dreaming also as an act of resistance in a way, because it was their way to know what will happen and how to prepare for all these things that they will say they will come, or that happened already too, and their ancestors were the ones already in front of this, and then it was all the spirits that guide them. So there was also another thing, that in each house, they will explain that their land is still life. So if they stop having dreams, or they start having the dreams that are bad, or that they're considered bad, then they will have to build their house in another place, so they can start getting more dreams. So everything was kind of like this system that it's like this symbiotic relations that also Eduardo Kahn speaks about on his book also. So yeah, I think that's a little bit about the film, and the women, the role of the women there with the land was also how, like how connected they are with this land, and what is their I guess their energy. So everything that the women did in this land or do in this land has an energy that it has to be passed through generations. So that's how they call it the pahus, and how to have a good living. So basically, good living for them is to protect these energies, not the energies of the river, the forest, and the wind, because those are the three main energies that gives us life, and that continues to be contaminated. And we have to protect those three energies, because those are also living spirits that if they get destroyed, then the spirits will die. And then that's how, here in the cities, we don't, sometimes we don't have like clean water. And what does it mean to have clean water in these communities? It's their livelihood. They shower there, they cook from there, they fish. So it's something that they live on, and that's why they always are so strong to protect it and to resist all these things that all this extractivism that happens in their territories. So I don't know. That's basically what the film, or like what the film tries to portray or to represent. And then it's also myself, I guess, exploration with the voiceover of how I kind of emerge myself into this other, for me was another reality of like just being in a place, in the forest is just a completely other dimension. It's a gift, just waking up with all the sounds, and you never really have a silence, but it's so peaceful of just being with the forest. And they will talk every afternoon. They will hear kind of like a heartbeat in the land. And then they will tell me, "Do you hear this?" And then I remember at the beginning saying, "No, I don't hear anything." And then I will get upset and I will get mad and I'll be like, "Why don't I hear it?" And then they were so, I guess, so in tune with all these rhythms. And then every bird, there were a specific bird. If there was a song that they were doing, they will know, okay, something bad is going to happen, or someone is going, someone is going to die, and all these things, all the signs and symbols that they will say, everything will happen. And I remember getting sick and having this really intense dreams, and telling them, I had these dreams, I don't know. And the dreams were, of me having relations or like intercourse with all these other people. And it was such a weird dream and like such an intense dream. And then I asked them, I was like, what would it mean? And then I asked them, and then they will be like, you have to take care of yourself because you're going to get sick. So you have to try to change your dream. And then I'll be like, how do I change my dream? And then they will just explain to me all this, like the process of like going to sleep on a mind that is completely blank, and ask to meet with the spirits and to ask them to heal you during the dream. So I remember trying to do this, and then like you always, when you go to sleep, you always have all these things in your head, and then it's like, what do I have to do tomorrow? What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do a month from now? Like, what do I have to do? All these things that come, or like what you did yesterday, and you start thinking about all these things, and it was so hard to clear my head. And remember getting sick, like 2 days after that. And then I was like, I couldn't change the dream. And then they will just laugh. And then it will just be, well, now you just have to, like get all this medicine and you will be fine. So, and then it will just like be, like relying on these plants and always asking them to heal you or to do something, or what was your intention? It was, every time they will give me a medicine, they will be like, okay, you have to ask the plant, you have to ask the tobacco, you have to ask, and always, and learning how to always ask, when you shower in the river, you have to ask to cleanse your bad negativity and your bad energy. So this, you don't have if you had a bad dream, you'll have to go and shower in the river after your dream interpretation. And always asking, and now it's kind of like a routine that, like even when I go into the shower, I just remember, like going into this river and always asking. So asking the water to, and be thankful for that water that washes you and that just goes all over your body and cleanses you. And those things, I was thinking, it was like, yeah, you can really take care of something if you don't care, if you don't know what that something is. It's kind of like if you don't know this place, or if you don't know what this 3 elements does to a community like this, that relies, that their livelihood relies on this three things, on these 3 elements, the forest, and it's so easy, the forest, the water, and the wind. And if we don't know how this impacts all these other people and how it impacts the world, then we can really care for it, we can protect it. And it's such, I think that's also like the dilemma that a lot of us and people from all over the world also has, that we have things so easily. So like if we need something, we go to the supermarket, and if we need water, like we have running water all the time. But there you have to go to the river to shower. And if it gets contaminated, then your body's going to get contaminated. And then not just, your physical body, but also your spirit, because then the river is not there to cleanse, because the spirit is gone. So all these elements that we rely on, but we think we don't, because we were not there. We're not so to these 3 things, but in reality we are. Like they will talk about the dead land, here in the cities, and how when we put the cement, it's kind of like a dead land, but there's still the soil under that, and that even after we're gone, what takes over? It's nature. Nature will take over. It's like an abandoned house when, there's nobody living there. And then there is all like, you've seen, like this plants growing from the cement, or from the house itself. So it's all these things that, we sometimes we forget, or we just decide not to care about, because it's the dilemma. How do we take care of all these elements for future generations to come? How do we allow our dreams to guide this process? And
I might just jump in here, Tatiana, because I'm slightly conscious of time, just making sure that we're moving along. But I also think this pulls really interestingly into the next film, But particularly, you were talking quite a lot about like this idea of asking, and I think that seems really clear in your filmmaking approaches as well. This idea of the questioning power of the moving image in this milieu. The watery scenes, the actual underwater scenes. Again, I hope everybody's had a chance to see the film. If not, they're still available until midnight tonight, Finland time. But you can definitely see this in your filmmaking, which, there are these contrasting shots that are quite aerial, the drone footage. And then against that, you have this underwater footage. You have these twilight layered scenes that seem to be these kind of shifting realities. You have these flickering fire scenes. And I think that really definitely works with this idea of the kind of conductivity of the spirit, but also the conductivity of moving image and a way to approach that. And I love that. I don't know if it's a direct translation, but blooming women as that name, as this kind of generative relationship between the forest and women. So I think that is a kind of interesting way into some of what we've been discussing in terms of survival, and that idea in like Anthropocene feminism, that even when we talk about survival in the Anthropocene, we're talking in masculinist languages. We're talking about survivalist ethos, whereas actually survival in the more collective sense of an assembling of small scale systems of domesticity and neighborliness and caretaking is also to do with the claiming of responsibility for all human and non-human actants toward a goal of mutual thriving. So like that's a very different model of survival. I think this will bring us really interestingly into Mark's film, which is also and very directly about plants as doctors, even in direct address. And it really resonates with a lot of what Tatiana was saying as well, in terms of actually having to directly address the plant agents, which happens many times across this film amongst the plants, which I almost in my head think of as conversation amongst the plants. And also, particularly thinking of the last lines and the last moments of your film, Mark, this idea of patience. You have to be patient, Mark, you have to ask, but also being a patient. So you have to accept being a patient. So I think this will be an interesting kind of connection in terms of how these forms of subjectivity and patience can be explored. So just to introduce Mark, I'm just going to find this. So Mark will be talking about his film Amongst the Plants. Mark Lindenberg is a filmmaker and cultural anthropologist, graduated in the direction of cinematography on the Film Academy Amsterdam in 2013, and cultural anthropology and development sociology in the direction of visual ethnography at Leiden University in 2020. He combines writing with film on topics concerning medical anthropology, plant medicine, spirituality, and religion. He is currently working on a documentary concerning a man with bipolar disorder and his struggle to have a normal life without medication.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I have to admit I haven't seen the films. I'm in the middle of moving between places, so I haven't seen all the films. But I'll try to do that. I think I'll just send an email to all of you to try to get the films. So yeah, the film. Where shall I start? Thank you, Tatiana, for your beautiful talk about your film. It resonates a lot with my film as well, especially the part where you have to focus to really get into this field, where you have to have the patience and really immerse yourself into the field. And that's very difficult because we have so many roles as ethnographers, as field workers. Like we have to switch, we have to do our analytical part, but we also have to experience. And that was very difficult for me in the field. I only had 2.5 months for my master thesis to do field work for. So I felt a lot of stress making this happen. In the end, I stayed a lot longer than the 2.5 months because of the coronavirus. happened, and I wasn't really able to travel back. So this worked kind of in my advantage to stay longer in the place, so I could have more conversations with my research populations, with my interlocutors, and I think that worked very well for my film, but also for my thesis, for my written text. So just to hook on to Tatjana's work as well. I think what I get from it is that you're learning something that, especially your interpretation of your dreams. I had the same. Dreaming was also. I don't go too much into the film, but dreaming is also a big topic in the field that I was working on and researching in. But I mostly talk about the visions coming from during the ayahuasca ceremony, and this was also a learning curve, how to interpret them, but also how to communicate with them, just to be able to communicate with these spirits that you're experiencing. And I talk more about this in my written text. It's a multimodal thesis, so they complement each other. But what I experienced is that during my time with the different curanderos, with the different doctors, I had a lot of different visions, and my visions got really colored by the talks that I had with the curandero. So I spent time, and I had a lot of ceremonies with different cultured curanderos, and they all, even though they worked with the same medicine, they worked with the same plants, they all had their different approaches to them, and all had different spirits that they connected to. So that was very interesting how in the beginning of the ceremonies, I didn't have much visions. I didn't really have a lot of I couldn't really get into the ceremonies, and I thought, like, why is this happening to me? But it took a long time for me to understand what they were talking about, and to how I say this in my thesis is to get contaminated with their worldviews. And then to go to what Blake is saying, like, if you're with your hands on the camera, you're not with your hands in the soil, and I can definitely relate to that as well. This switching, I also as a cinematographer in Film Academy, I feel very comfortable with the camera around on my hip, like being ready to shoot, trying not to miss too much, and being ready for the moment. But combining this with like a healing process, I mean, I see this also as a healing process for me. That interrupts each other, and I really had to listen to the curanderos I was working with when they were saying, like, Mark, put the camera away and start working on yourself, because you can't do both at the same time. So I'm happy that they tried to correct me at times, and that I felt their authority to listen to them. So I think that really helped the film to listen to my interlocutors and bring it further. So it really helped for me to be longer in Peru, because also while I was longer there, I could edit the film there, and I could come back to the family I was staying with to show them the film. And and that had some great. We had some great discussions about it because I was interpreting things that they didn't necessarily meant. So in that case, I could still change the film in a way that they were also meaning it, like they were also thinking about it this way. So I was happy to be there for a longer time. And yeah, I what I experienced is that there is this, what Tatjana was also saying, I think I experienced that there was this collective health. I'm in this garden, someone comes in and is sick, and all the attention goes to this person, goes to the healing process of this person, and make sure that this person gets well again to be part and contribute to this family. But this also goes towards the plants. They take care of the plants. They take care of their animals. Their animals are also their companions in a way. They call them guardians. You can see them in the film as the chickens who help in the ceremony. So it's how I see it is, it's like a collective health. Not only for the humans, but also for the plants, but also for the animals, but also for the stones they use, but also for the wind, the sun. It's all very important to them. Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. That's really great. Thank you. I mean, I love the fact that the film is so visceral and subjective, and yet it's still at the same time about this collective idea of health and, storytelling beyond the individual. And one of the things that struck me in the way you were talking about interlocutors is, that idea which, again, comes up in all of the films. It's very much explicitly discussed in Felix and Miriam's film, that we don't just ask, how do we think like a forest? How do we think like a plant? But we also ask, what are we to plants? What are we to the bees? How am I approaching the bees? And I think that is a really interesting question in terms of it not being just to do with channeling into a different subjectivity, but actually taking on the responsibility of our own forms of address, forms of conversation, forms of respect, but also our own economic, legal, political, and real interventions and responsibilities. So I think that will be a really interesting way to bring us into the final two films. The first one, Clayt, is actually not able to be here at the moment because Clayt is ill. So I hope people have had a chance to see it. I'm just going to quickly tell you it's lifting the green screen. So it's very much about these politics of ecotourism and the industries behind it. So I think that throws some of these films we've just discussed into a different form of relief as well, in a way that's incredibly interesting. And the final person that will be speaking is Frauke, whose film My Neighbor from the Amazon is a really interesting version of a travelogue film, which kind of brings out some of these responsibilities. I think it's really fascinating to take a film that's focused around this transactional exchange, which is the idea of the buying or selling of a piece of land. And this is perhaps the film that brings in the theme that is in all of these films, but this idea of what it is to be a neighbor and the kind of fascinating complexity of what that means in this central space and metaphor of a piece of land that is for sale. And I think it's a really wonderfully layered exploration of that. So just to introduce Frauke, I don't think I have a bio for you, so perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself however you'd prefer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, everyone. It's really nice watching all of your films. Really happy about it. So I'm Frauke van der Velde. I'm a visual anthropologist. I graduated from the University of Amsterdam. And this is my second film. And the film was actually meant, like everything I record, as a pre-research. So I had this opportunity to go along with my dad, actually, and a friend who wanted to buy a piece of land. And I thought, this is so interesting, like ethically for me as well. So I really wanted to just jump along and do a pre-research and then later come back to do the real film. But then I stumbled across so many topics that were just, amazing to me. It was so, layered in a way. It was quite a lot, maybe in the film as well. But also I wanted to give a portrait of what you come across and also in yourself. So I do a lot of voiceovers, and for me, a big theme is the ethics of it. And then again, okay, you can be very ethically, you can be very political correct. And what do you actually do? Who do you actually help as an activist? Where does your ethics and reality meet? So that for me was a really big topic to explore, and not just staying on an academic meta level, but really going into the field. Also, what Blake mentioned, was very happy about that. Like, do you actually make things worse? What is worse? Like, where is reality? So that for me was very interesting. And I was very critical. Also, so the themes I came across, like these spiritual tourists who I met in the plane, who were going to the Amazons to do ayahuasca with the natives. So I met a lot of these kinds of people, and I was very critically about it. But then the indigenous, the Hunikuin, who they actually went to, they were super happy about it. And they said, like this, we have a platform to the world. Our government, the president, Bolsonaro of Brazil, doesn't listen to us. And now we do have an international platform. It's amazing. So that was really good for me to have like a shift back. Like, okay, I can have all these ideas about what is actually the way forward. But what does it mean for people and reality to really listen to that? So I hope I gave a portrait of that friction and uncomfortability as well, and all these different voices. So that was really my aim in the film.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that totally brings together a lot of the films in terms of that friction between the global perspectives and these local perspectives, and also plays out some interesting questions about generational collaboration. The kind of father-daughter relationship in the film is interesting, in respect to some of the other films which are also to do with generational forms of knowledge. I'm aware that we've actually only got half an hour for the more discursive part, so I will also kind of be keen that I don't hug the asking questions too much, because I want to make sure that everybody's able to kind of ask questions of each other, and also the rest of the audience and everybody else that's here can participate. But I'll just ask a first question and, see how we go and what people would like to talk about. I think one of the things that seems quite striking, Frauke, you were talking about voice and voiceover, and I think all of the films have a really interesting attitude to voice, language, and sound and translation. I think every film includes music at a certain point, or a musical performance, for instance, except for Bewildered Companions, which is also very interesting for its silence in the film, but also these busy sounds of the laboratory and the bees themselves. So I'd like to ask how ideas of translation, anybody might want to speak to how ideas of translation worked in the film. I'm thinking literal translation, but also the translation of, in Bewildered Companions, that moment of holding a piece of, is it acetate over a hive and then marking where the different brood points are, like that itself a kind of transcription. So like these different moments of translation and these difficulties of translation of voice, music and sound. So I'd like to kind of open up with that issue of translation, which seems common across the films, if anybody would like to respond to that. But if you'd like to speak about something else or kind of catch up on things you haven't said earlier, please, anybody who'd like to speak, do. And if you are in the audience and you have a question, I'm not sure if we can raise hands here, but if not, just, make yourself known.
Is that just to jump in on the translation point? I was going to say one thing that I found really powerful just to seeing all the films together was also that obviously so much of the focus was around the forest. And I think this talk of, the question of silence that comes up for anyone who spent time in a forest knows that that's not the sound. And I find perhaps rather than just thinking pure translation, which is so clear for me working across, an endangered language, versus sort of global colonial languages. It's also, I find that translation of more rhythms and sounds and how that plays out to be a really interesting sort of aspect. And I think also what sort of sticks out to me and what from my film and from the others is also this idea more so not just of translation of language, but of translation of epistemology, which I suppose we're always sort of exploring, but that place of how it comes together, I think, is fascinating. And I'm just really resonating with Frauke's sort of notion of using the neighbor as the literal sort of example within your film, but actually of finding how to position the idea of the next to and some sort of the neighbor as the connotation of giving ownership in space, but of finding sort of positionality amongst. And I think that just within this rhetoric of, seeing the film in an activist light of being a negotiator or how it bridges these sort of gaps, that sort of resonates as, some interesting sort of thoughts to throw out there.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I would also like to comment on that, also with regard to what Blake said earlier about the division of the sensory or the sensorial of the everyday versus the stories that we tell, because that's an approach that we also had with our film, where we really separated these more sensory observational chapters from the more
discursive
ones. So. And what I felt was really fruitful also to give the viewers time to dive in and get these kind of different ways of knowledges. That is not only a textual or verbal or spoken knowledge on the one hand. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was this question whether that has been discussed in a couple of comments already, and I want to maybe pose it or ask it differently. Is it really that we are detached when we look through a camera or when we hear through headphones and a microphone? Because I made a different experience in a way. And I experienced like when being in a field and really immersing myself through the sound in a tree hole, for example, where the bees live, and then you hear different sounds very, very directly. And for me, there was kind of a way of really bringing myself bodily into these fields, and then having played back to me, being able to ask different questions. So I would say that the sound spheres and also like what Felix did with the camera, the macroscopic lenses, was also a way to bring ourselves bodily closer to the field. And playing that back to our research participants was also interesting, so show them, for example, in slow motion, moves that you wouldn't normally see. So, and then you being able to experience a singular be as an individual and not only as part of a buzzing cloud, you know. So in a way, yeah, I found this also very fruitful as research tools.
Totally. And I think the translation topic, this is also could also be seen as in a very broad sense, because if I get back to these conceptualization of translation by Michel Callon, how it is developed for the actor network theory, then it is really in each of these approaches, this is already the translation of a complexity into a very particular worldview and its decisive language. And we are again trying to translate this in a way in these in these film for the audiences. And I think translation is a very fruitful concept to really look at how different sets of knowledge and kinds of knowledge can be made accessible in a way. And I think film has with audiovisual media have a very interesting capacity to create spaces for these experiences.
Also in Mark's film, for example, the moment when someone said, Mark, put away the camera, you know, so you can be there. That's, I mean, for us, that's so incredibly interesting to watch and to realize, okay, so that's the situation you were in, and we wouldn't have experienced that if you hadn't been there with the camera. So I think that's also very, I mean, that's our craft. That's what we do. So yeah.
I love that idea of the complexity translated into a worldview as that itself being the subject matter. It's almost the idea of the homogenous-scene or the plantation-scene, where all the different forms of meaning of our environments are translated into simple resource values. So like that idea of like the simple homogenous-scene. I think what was it? I think sorry, I literally just forgot what I was going to say. I'm so sorry. Somebody else speak.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for these really amazing presentations. My question mostly relates to the fieldwork itself. So I would ask you, like, to all the people that present, how did you introduce yourself in the fieldwork, like the very first time, let's say, and how did you build, let's say, the trust with your interlocutors and with the people that you wanted to, let's say, research on? And yeah, how did you manage all these kind of relationships from you, like for you that you are kind of outsiders and you introduce yourself in these communities, or I don't know. And what about also, I don't know if you mentioned it already in your presentations, I might have missed it, but what about the language of the place? Like, did you learn it on the field or did you learn it before? And thank you so much.
I could answer a little bit of that. About the relations, I think that's such an important part, because when we go to all these different places, we don't know how those relations are going to be. We don't know if people are going to accept us, or if the place itself it's going to accept us. So for me, I think it was easy, and I was one of the lucky ones to, you know, be able to go into this community that I've never met before, and they were all guided by the energy of the person. So they explained to me that if the energy that they got from me was a negative one, I wouldn't be allowed to be there in their territory, and I would have been told to leave and just not work with them. But I think the way that I introduced the project to when I went as a researcher is also like you have all this like preconceptions before you go, and then you think like everything is going to work as you envision it, but then you go there and you meet all these people, and then you start trying to change all these pieces, and the narrative completely changes. So the I guess the relationship, building this trust with them and just being honest with them, with what you want to do or why you went there, what was your purpose, and how you're going to represent them. Like the representation, I think it's the most important part, because how are you going to represent these people, like telling someone else's story in a way that you're not like we were taught, like we were talking about, like making it worse or making more damage. And yeah, I think that's the most important as research, is just, being honest with our participants and the people that we work with.
Mm-hmm. I think it would also be interesting to kind of bring that question of translation also to some of the visual decisions that were made in the film, which are really interesting in terms of the fact that Blake was talking about this paralysis, different versions of storytelling paralysis. So I think it's interesting that we have this chronic exposure to bad stories as well as other forms of contamination. And I'd be interested to find out a bit more from the filmmakers about where you made decisions to kind of set up deliberately in the film ways of making a film. If we think to the fact that this conference overall has this theme of rules and transgressions, we do have these kind of traditional and normative habits of filmmaking. And I'm really interested in places where I could see that explicitly played with. I'm thinking, for instance, of the fact that in Bewildered Companions, there are talking heads, but the talking heads are in black and white compared to the color of the more intimate embodied scenes. So I think these are really interesting visual uses of these devices, and the idea of us as spectators as well interpreting these films. So I wonder if anybody can speak to their kind of specific filmmaking or visual practice and how that worked with these ideas of translation as well.
So yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I had a very clear use of lenses. I think I really wanted to get close to the people, get close to the plants I was researching on by standing close. So instead of using a lot of macro or a lot of longer lenses, I only used like a 16-35 lens just to maintain always the short distance I wanted to keep. And that worked really well in the garden, I think, to still have the environment around when you're making a close-up of someone, so you feel you're still in the garden, and that everything around it is with it, is there. So that, yeah, there was one specific choice I made in terms of filmmaking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think both are very interesting questions. If we bring it back to making the films, actually, instead of thinking about our role only as anthropologists in the field, because I think if we do anthropological research or ethnographic work, there's no way around participating in a way also without the camera there. There isn't really this staying outside as you might have it in journalism or so. So before we started filming, it was a lot of working with these people we were actually having in the film now, and trying all these practices ourselves. So I was sitting with them and ripping out these little puppies out of the comp and doing all the dirty work. And this is very important to also understand what to film and how to film it. Because if you didn't make these experience your own by yourself, how to really understand the implicit knowledge there, the practical knowledge there, and how to create a resonance between the audience and what you actually experienced yourself in the field. But on the other aspect of the transgression, I think this is a difficult topic when it comes to fieldwork and the role of transgressions in the fieldwork. If we don't want to take it too general that fieldwork is a transgression in itself anyways. But I think in the filmic approach, especially as we have to address an audience that is highly trained by a very particular style of documentary film, especially when it comes to nature documentaries, it is nearly impossible to kick them out of these comfort zone where they expect that they see beautiful images and this voice of God that explains everything to them and makes them understand it in exactly the way the director wants it. But to go against this is only possible with a certain transgression of these habituation of the audience. So I have the feeling it has to be made clear from beginning on that this is not what is happening here, or it has to build up and then deconstruct it actively so that this works out. And I think all of the films here found interesting strategies to somehow kick the audience out of these comfort zone where you can just lay back and someone explains to you the world, and you don't actually have to be active in experiencing and understanding and building up an opinion.
Maybe just to add shortly, in our case, that's why we decided to, Amy, you mentioned that, to put the interviews in black and white and to have them really bring them into very short discursive connection where people also interrupt each other and say, usually you would just listen to a person and you would wonder, your mind starts wondering, who is this guy? And you imagine this whole biography. And in our case, we really wanted to have the discourse as a protagonist in a way, and to depict and to show how the interruptions there are and how it's not even a bit a coherent story that you could just follow, but it's different bits and pieces. So.
And that goes against this tradition of continuity montage that we are trained in, actually, that you shouldn't see any cut in the editing process. You have to hide it. No, you don't have to. You have to make it as the experience,
That's really wonderful on those ideas of deconstructive strategies, which I can definitely see across the films, which are all in their own ways experimental ways of exploring survival endeavors. I remember also in your film, I think, in terms of that idea of deconstructive strategy, in the film credits, I love the fact that the bees are credited before some of the names of the humans. I feel like that playing with film credits is a really interesting part of your film as well.
Yeah, I think Mark did the same. He was also introducing all the animals in the credits in the end. That it was in the beginning is just because the bees start with an A. This is why they are in the beginning. The apis.
Yeah.
Yeah. But of course, this is another small transgression that goes against our what we are used to. Very end credits are very anthropocentric, I would say.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in on a couple of those points. I think with the question of the language, of speaking the language, I think what was actually so paramount and clear, I've sort of spent the last 8 years with Penan communities and speak Penan. And what becomes very obvious is that when you do speak a language of the land, that it actually has an intrinsic relationship with the land. And I honestly feel like I can sometimes speak to the monkeys or the birds that, you know, they understand Penan language. I try and speak in Bahasa or in English and they don't understand, but Penan, they respond. So I think there's actually power in moving language away from just the thought of the human as well and putting it in the land in that context. And one thing I was going to say, sort of maybe in response to these points, is also part of the starting point, and I think the impetus that continued the journey in my case was always with the hope of what the camera could do. And so part of that engagement with, you know, with the communities, with sort of everyone, was always about this question of, when someone else sees this story, there will be justice. And I think, you know, that in many ways was sort of like part of the issue for me as filmmaker, almost like a false promise, a false hope. And yeah, and just to share that as a little thought.
Yeah, can I jump in? I don't know how to raise the hand, sorry. Yeah, about the false hope. I really like that you brought that up, because I also felt that way for my participants. In a conversation, you can hear that they're really distrustful also to answer the question of I don't remember who asked the question before, somebody from the audience, but how you communicate, how you handle, you know, with your interlocutors, because they were so untrustworthy of white people, Western people coming in, taking their land, occupying. It was also something I felt I had to give them something more. And I felt that maybe my camera, I also said it almost in that way, could help in that way. And that also establishes a weird power dynamic in a way, or an expectation that I think is really good to be aware of or think about in field work. You know, especially when you work with indigenous communities, marginalized people, forests. Yeah, so just wanted to throw that in.
And sometimes just filmically, I think some of the other thing was, it was like, I use fiction film as a method. Like, I feel like that's, you know, that's that process. And sometimes I think it's also, I really resonate with Miriam. And just to clarify that thing of the camera, I absolutely feel like the camera and the microphone allow me to see and hear and completely heighten my sensorial engagement with the space. And I think I still find that cine trance notion of entering as the deepest sort of aspect of practice. And yeah.
And that entering as well, I think, in terms of this resonance with the fictional as well as the non-fictional, I guess one example that I can see deconstructed in some of these films is like the quest narrative, you know, the kind of subjective quest. Like Frauke, for instance, in your film, I love this idea of like this piece of property being the kind of destination. And yet that's kind of questioned by moments such as, while traveling towards it, somebody saying, "Oh, this piece of land costs the same as a Citroen CV2," or it's, you know. But I feel like that kind of throws into relief this idea of the film questing towards this place, but then kind of playing and upheaving that seems really deconstructive as well for me. I don't really want to. I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I want to make sure we've got only about 5 minutes left. So I also want to make sure if there are other audience members who haven't spoken up yet, if anybody wants to kind of throw something in, or if one of the filmmakers wants to return to something we were talking about earlier, or something they haven't had a chance to mention yet.
Even as a general question, I was going to ask, like, seeing all of these films together, how does it feels like this question of so much of the process of dealing with environmental storytelling is about decommodifying and trying to show those interconnected interspecies sort of aspects. But how, as a group of practitioners with very different sort of spaces, is there possibility of sort of, of seeing how these stories sort of come together or unite? Like, as I said, that parallels of forest, sick planet, all of these things. Like, I'm thinking about almost like a question of collaborative practice of how, in a situation like this of environmental activists all with very different spaces, when we see these parallels, is there sort of value in heightening the synchronicity between sites? Something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we all, in a way, are dealing or trying to show different realities, different spheres. Also, now when we're talking, we're quite headly, no? We're all talking in academic sentences, and to also be aware of, like, hey, we're all sensorial beings, also when we're there, but also the people watching the film and hearing the sounds, the foreign effect. And I think each film in a way tries to show that, like, there are different realms of reality, like dreams, like visions in ayahuasca, in plant medicine, different ways of bees, different peoples. So yeah, I think that is something really beautiful and hard to grasp because we are all in such a headly sphere.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how that also comes into play with the actual networks of distribution and commodification of the films themselves, because these are very sensitive films about different cultural practices of education and knowledge making. So I'm interested about where these films are going to go. I mean, I wonder if anybody can speak to that, like how you are seeing your own film or distributing it, and what role this film can take. I mean, if anybody has you submitting your films to festivals, like where will these films go and live? And if we're talking about decommodification, it's really interesting to think about the actual context of film networks themselves and how you will be distributing this work. Does anybody have any screenings coming up of this work, or?
Yeah, I can say a bit about this.
Yep.
My film is going like to a lot of different platforms, a lot of different places. My supervisor had contact with Alexander Street to publish it there. So it's going to be published on Alexander Street, but also there's going to be in Amsterdam this coming Sunday. It's called Get Wise, Legalize. It's like a little pop-up festival about the use and the legalization of psychedelics. And next to that, it's going to ethnographic film festivals and documentary film festivals. So yeah, quite a wide range that is reaching now. Yeah, and I'm very, very funny. A friend of mine is working on a campsite where they do also like alternative workshops, and she asked me to display there for an audience. So I'm very happy that the audience is very wide, like anthropologists, but also like psychedelic people into psychedelic substances, but also just people going to a points out. So it's interesting how the film travels. Yeah.
I think the question of distribution immediately brings up my dissatisfaction with the current status that we are facing as visual anthropologists, and even this name is already slightly annoying if I ought to put this on the table so directly, because actually we don't consider ourselves as visual anthropologists, but we are just anthropologists with a broader range of methods and approaches. And I have the feeling that the way film and textual, like paper and books representations are still divided on the technical basis of the 20th century, and this is, so of course there are these film festivals on the one hand, and some distributors for scientific films, but actually everyone has ended up, and all the publishers also in the digital age, and it is still hard for them to take audiovisual or multimodal approaches serious and integrate it into their publication system. And so I hope that we will experience some development there within the next years. That would be very helpful.
I wonder also if this is something that it will be changing after COVID in terms of how we access and distribute, how even film festivals work. While we're on that, I mean, I know we're now closing. The next session will be starting in 27 minutes. So I also want to say before we separate that in terms of access, since we're talking about it, these films are still all available. And I think they are fantastic alongside each other. So if you haven't had a chance to see them all, I would suggest that you do. I think they'll be available until midnight. So midnight finish time, which would be 10 p.m. UK time. Yeah, thank you so much for fascinating discussions. I mean, I hate having the role of having to say, oh, it's over now, because this has been really fascinating. But hopefully we'll meet each other in the further panels today. And this has started some conversations, not just between the people, but between the works, which I think are really, really fascinating. So thank you, everybody, for joining. If anybody has any last thing they want to say, then feel free. But I just want to say thanks to all of the presenters and how much that I liked the work. And it was very inspiring. This was a really inspiring morning. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's so good to share with everyone and everything that resonates, with the forest, with the people, and that everyone, we are all connected. And that's, I think it's not difficult to understand that everything is just interconnected, and we just have to listen and decipher those symbols that are in front of our eyes.
Yeah, just as a little thank you, and just one point, just to that last question about where the films go and that story. Yeah, so beautiful. I think it's so beautiful today to connect also for the value of dialogue. And I think one of the pivotal sort of aspects that I always find is this question of, is film the catalyst of dialogue, or is it the mediator? And is it that thing where, like you were saying, Miriam and Felix, you can create a film and by doing that bring people together, bring the diversity together, or you can use the film as the vehicle to share that message. But I do think that there's a deep, skepticism I have of when we just talk about the hypothetical audience, the anonymous audience, versus actually starting to think about where these films also can have impact, and about specifically showing it with those different audiences. So, but I think as an underlying reminder and a takeaway from me today, it's also that thing of sometimes not necessarily trying to have a message, but just sometimes just taking people on an experience and asking a question is more profound than anything. But I'm grateful to everyone and to you, Amy. So thanks for today.
Thank you so much, everyone. And that's a fantastic point to end on. I love the idea of like, is it the initiation or is it the mediation of these different discursive practices? I'll just let everybody know that the next panel will be at 12:15 after this break. And it is the Young Scholars Network meeting, Applied Careers and Ethnological Knowledge. And everything else, you can just go back to the main timetable and click onto the separate Zoom links. So hopefully we'll be seeing each other again in the later panels. But thank you so much for coming together for this discussion, which has been incredibly inspiring. I'm really grateful to have taken part in it. Thank you.